What if the biggest threat to your sex life isn't getting older and it isn't low testosterone? And for many people, it isn't even pornography. What if your brain has simply become exceptionally good at responding to an environment that real intimacy was never designed to compete with? If porn feels effortless while connection feels harder, and if your body responds one way when you're alone, and another way when you're with someone that you genuinely care about, or perhaps you've wondered whether terms like gooning or dopamine or porn-induced erectile dysfunction are actually real or maybe apply to you, today's episode may explain why. Because once you understand what your brain is actually learning during repeated high-novelty sexual stimulation, you will never look at desire the same way again. This episode is brought to you by my HarperCollins published book, Mind Over Explicit Matter. Learn how artificial stimulation miswires your brain and what you can do to rewire it back to purpose, intimacy, and connection. Go to drtrishleigh.com/book. Welcome back to the Desire Rewire podcast with me, Dr. Trish Leigh, cognitive neuroscientist, author, and creator of the Desire Rewire method. Here, I help people understand how modern overstimulation hijacks the brain's reward system, and more importantly, how to rewire it toward healthy desire, real intimacy, and lasting connection. So just to be clear, today's conversation is not about shame, and it isn't about telling you that anything is broken. It is about understanding one of the most powerful principles in neuroscience. Your brain becomes exceptionally good at whatever it repeatedly practices. That one principle explains almost everything we're going to talk about today. So as we go through this episode, I want you to remember 4 important words: hijacked, miswired, rewired, and hardwired for life. Because once you understand that progression, you'll stop asking, what's wrong with me? And instead, you'll start asking a much better question. What has my brain been practicing all this time? Your brain doesn't practice pornography. It practices patterns. Every repetition teaches your nervous system what to expect until the pathway becomes the easiest one to follow. That is neuroplasticity. So if you're struggling, your brain hasn't broken, it's actually adapted. Most people think that sexual arousal is purely physical. It isn't. It's mostly neurological. Over time, your brain begins linking arousal to cues like privacy or your phone or scrolling, novelty, anticipation. Eventually, those cues become part of the arousal itself. That's conditioning. But now let us talk about dopamine, because this is where so many people misunderstand what is truly happening in the brain. Dopamine is not only or primarily the pleasure chemical. It's the pursuit chemical. It rises with anticipation, novelty, and the possibility of reward. That's exactly why pornography can become such a powerful teacher. Porn offers something that real life never can: endless novelty. The next click always promises something possibly even more stimulating. In that case, your reward system never has to wait. It doesn't have to negotiate or communicate or tolerate uncertainty. And your brain is always learning from the environment that you repeatedly place it in. This is what I call the dopamine hijack. Not because pornography automatically damages every single brain. The real neuroscience question is much simpler. For most people, it's this: what has my brain been practicing? When this pattern continues long enough, it can evolve into something many people now call gooning. From a neuroscience perspective, the issue isn't really the label. It's the prolonged training that your brain undergoes. Long sessions that are built around edging, endless novelty, escalating stimulation, and complete control repeatedly teach the brain that that's what sexual arousal should feel like. But real intimacy asks for almost the opposite. It asks for presence, patience, connection, emotional safety, and genuine connection. So fundamentally, these are 2 very different environments. So if your brain spends hours rehearsing one, it shouldn't surprise us when it responds very differently within the other. That's not failure, that's learning. And that's where the dopamine hijack, becomes miswiring in your brain, the desire miswire. This is the point where many people begin to panic because something changes. Pornography still works, but real intimacy, it feels different. You need more intense fantasy than you used to. It becomes harder to stay present with a partner. Your body responds one way alone and another way with someone that you genuinely love. Something's off. And that's when fear takes over. Am I losing my attraction? Is something permanently wrong with me? I don't think these are the right questions. I encourage you to think of a better question. What has my brain been practicing all this time? Because if your reward system has spent months, years, decades learning in one environment, then it shouldn't surprise us when it responds differently in another. That's what I mean by becoming miswired. It's not broken. It's not permanently damaged. It's simply adapted to repeated experience. But that doesn't mean that pornography is the only factor that affects sexual performance. Of course, stress, sleep, hormones, medications, anxiety, cardiovascular health, and your relationship dynamics, they all matter a lot too. So if you're experiencing persistent erectile difficulties, it's important to talk with your doctor, your qualified healthcare professional. But if pornography works while real intimacy feels increasingly difficult, conditioning may be a very important part of this overarching picture. And here's the question that most people never ask. If your brain learned desire in one direction, can it learn it back? The answer is yes. So here's the hopeful part. If your brain became hijacked and then miswired, it can become rewired, and I'll tell you why. Because the same neuroplasticity that strengthened one pathway, it can strengthen another through repetition. Recovery isn't about fighting your brain. It's about teaching it something better. That's where Desire Rewire begins. The first step is reducing the training signal that you've been giving it. If endless novelty has been teaching your reward system to expect endless novelty, stop rehearsing that pathway. Not as punishment, but as retraining. Create a little friction between you and the automaticity of the habit. Put your phone somewhere else. Use blockers if you need to. Interrupt the routines that have become automatic. Every time you interrupt an old pathway, you create space to strengthen a new one. That is what I call the instant rewire. The second step is reconnecting with real sensation. High novelty pornography trains attention to chase high level visual and auditory stimulation. Real intimacy is experienced through your entire nervous system, through breath, touch, warmth, presence, and connection. At first, that may feel underwhelming to you because your brain has been conditioned to expect intensity. You're teaching it to appreciate authenticity, and those are not the same things. If you're in a relationship, stop making performance the goal. Instead, make connection the goal. Slow down, talk, laugh, touch, kiss, hold each other. Because the healthiest question isn't, can I perform? Can I get the most dopamine out of this experience? The question is, can I be fully present and really enjoy it? Ironically, when the pressure to perform decreases, the nervous system often responds much more naturally. Now, if you're single, this work is just as important because you're shaping the reward system that you'll bring into your next relationship. Every repetition is preparing you for something, or for someone, hopefully. So the question is, who or what are you becoming ready for? So this is also where I teach more about what I call the instant rewire. Most people think recovery begins when the urge disappears. I don't. It's not. Recovery begins the moment you consciously choose real-life dopamine over algorithm-driven, high-intensity artificial reward. That's the instant rewire, my friend. Every one of those decisions strengthens the brain that you're trying to build. Not perfectly, but repeatedly, because your brain is always practicing something. So my question to you is, what are you practicing today? And here's what I hope you remember from today's episode of the pod. Your brain isn't broken, it's learned. And what your brain learns, it can relearn if it's not serving you. If your brain became hijacked, it can become rewired. If your desire is miswired, it can become hardwired for life. But before you assume that pornography is the biggest challenge your reward system will ever face, which is close, there's something even more powerful that's already here. It doesn't just show you stimulation, it learns what stimulates you, and that can change and worsen everything. That's exactly what we're going to unpack in our next episode, because once you understand where artificial intimacy is headed, you'll understand why protecting and rewiring your brain has never been as important as it is today. So until next time, remember this: your brain is always practicing something. So ask yourself, what am I wiring in today? But if today's episode made you realize that your brain, in fact, has been practicing patterns you never intentionally chose, you don't have to figure this out on your own. Please go over to drtrishleigh.com. You can schedule to talk to me privately. I offer private consultations. In that consultation, I can help you understand your unique brain, your specific patterns, and the neuroscience-backed strategies that can help to move you forward. So whether you're struggling with compulsive pornography use, changes in your desire, performance anxiety, or you're simply feeling stuck, I can help you identify what's happening beneath the behavior and create a personalized path toward your brain's rewiring. So please go over to drtrishleigh.com, and I want you to remember always and today to control your brain, because if you don't, in fact, it will control you. I'll see you next time.